I cheated with my sister-in-law's ex and invented an open marriage to continue with my lover. But my husband took revenge in an epic way on social media with intimate proof and destroyed my life. My name is Pilar, I am 28 years old, and I am an interior designer. I met Emiliano, who is now 31 years old, when he took his sister's car to be checked at a workshop where I was coordinating a project. He is an aircraft mechanic, but occasionally he helps his brother-in-law with car mechanics. I had never been the type to fall in love easily, but something in his calm attitude, his firm gaze, and his grease-stained hands shook me inside in a way I was not prepared for. It was as if he had stepped out of a fantasy of stability and contained masculinity. We exchanged contact information under a professional pretext that lasted less than 24 hours. The next day, we were already planning a dinner. The beginning was impressive. We had that urgent chemistry of someone who wants to live everything fast, without fear of the future. After 3 months, we were already living together, and 6 months later, we got married in a small but intense ceremony. My friends thought everything was rushed, but I felt that I had finally found someone with whom I could grow old. Emiliano was methodical, hardworking, quiet, and seemed to love me in a silent way. I was more impulsive, creative, talkative, and he said that contrast was what made us feel good. For a while, I really believed it. I felt that we were building a solid life, a home, a plan, a common destiny. But the truth is that, after the first 2 years, the flame began to die down. What was once passion had become routine. Sex became sporadic, technical, almost bureaucratic. We talked little, we laughed less. Emiliano always seemed tired, immersed in work, distant. I, on the other hand, was trying to rekindle something, but I felt like I was the only one pulling this boat. When I tried to talk about it, he would change the subject or say it was a phase. But the phase became a month, the month became a year, and I felt alone, sleeping next to someone who no longer saw me. The incompatibility was not just physical, it was emotional. Emiliano was firm, but cold, a man of few words and long mental absences. I wanted spontaneous trips, he wanted silence. I talked about art, and he would respond, "Great." And although I tried several times to fill that void, I began to accept the idea that maybe he was not meant to accompany me in everything. But instead of breaking up or seeking couples therapy, I did something I am even more ashamed of today. I started looking outside for what I felt was missing at home. It was in that emotional void that Matthias reappeared in my life. Matthias was the ex of my sister-in-law, Carolina, Emiliano's sister, and we always had a strange, almost invisible tension between us. We had met at a family barbecue, even before Emiliano and I got married. Matthias was the type of man who looks at you as if he could undress you with his thoughts, but without being vulgar. But at that time, he was with Carolina and I was in a different vibe. After the two of them ended badly, he disappeared and I did not even think about him anymore, until a few years later we met again, by chance, in a cafe. And then everything started to go off the rails. I did not know it yet, but that reunion would be the trigger for a series of decisions that would destroy my marriage, my reputation, and part of my identity. At that moment, all I wanted was to feel wanted again, to be seen, touched, praised. I wanted to remember who I was before becoming the forgotten wife of an absent man. It was not for revenge, nor out of malice. It was need, it was ego, it was stupidity, but it was also a desperate attempt to feel something again, something that was not that domestic void that was absorbing me day after day. And Matthias knew exactly how to fill that kind of void. The day I met Matthias again seemed like any other day. I was trying to enjoy an afternoon alone in a cafe near downtown, planning a new set for an annoying client who was draining my energy. And it was there, at the back of the room, where I saw that crooked smile and that intense gaze that never knew how to hide his interest. He approached as if he had no weight in the past, as if he had not been the ex of my sister-in-law, my husband's sister. We talked for half an hour, maybe less, but it was long enough to feel my heart race in a way it had not in years. And deep down, I knew it. It was not a coincidence. From that day on, we started exchanging messages. First, the innocent ones, "How nice to see you. What a lovely coincidence." But soon came the emojis with double meanings, the compliments disguised as jokes, the jokes that only flirt with the forbidden. I felt a rush of adrenaline with every notification with his name. It was as if Matthias knew exactly what to say to make me feel alive. It did not take long for our conversation to take on more physical tones. He remembered details about me that I did not even know I had shown. I, for my part, threw myself into the game as if I had nothing to lose. But I did, and I knew it. Our first meeting was at the same cafe where we met again, a quick lunch, in theory. In practice, gazes that were too long, touches that were too brief and full of tension. He grabbed my wrist as I said goodbye, and the shiver that ran through my body was like a warning. But I did not listen. The following week, I made a plan to visit a fabric store for a project and met him in an almost empty parking lot. There were no long kisses, no explicit caresses, but the way he put his hand on my back as he spoke was enough to break a barrier that would never be restored. By the time I got into the car, I was already an accomplice to my own betrayal. That night, when Emiliano came home after the night shift, I pretended to be asleep and felt dirty. While my body still vibrated from the sexual tension Matthias provoked in me, my mind sank into a sticky mud of guilt. I wanted to convince myself that I had done nothing wrong, that there were no kisses or explicit touches, so technically, I had not cheated. But the truth is that, inside my head, I had already crossed all the limits. I was cheating on my husband with his sister's ex, a scandal about to erupt. And I did not stop. I did not want to stop. After that day, Matthias and I started seeing each other more often. First, as if by chance, then with scheduled times and constructed excuses. The first time he really kissed me was inside my own car, with the windows fogged up and the sound of the rain drowning everything out. He pulled me hard by the nape of my neck, and I let him. Moreover, I begged him. The tension that had been building between us exploded in a whirlwind of raw and reckless desire. We had sex right there, fast, urgent, as if the world was going to end. When it was over, I was trembling with pleasure, with fear, with everything at once. After that, there was no turning back. I was completely involved. Matthias had become my escape, my secret, my addiction. And like any addiction, it began to take over my routine. I found myself smiling to myself, remembering his messages, his hands, the way he made me feel desired. As Emiliano got more and more lost in his routine, I went deeper into that abyss that seemed so sweet on the surface, but so rotten at its core. The worst part is that, although I knew I was wrong, I did not regret it yet. And maybe that is what condemns me the most to this day, not having stopped to think. I just went. After a few weeks of meetings with Matthias, the guilt began to take another form, no longer as pain, but as justification. I told myself that the problem was not me, it was the relationship model we were stuck in. I started consuming content about relational freedom. I read texts about free love and self-knowledge, and I convinced myself that I was not a traitor, just a woman who needed more than what traditional marriage could offer. In theory, it sounded good. In practice, it was a way to try to rationalize my desire and the excitement that Matthias aroused in me. I needed a way out that would give me peace and, at the same time, give me permission to continue. It was then that the idea of an open marriage began to form in my mind, not as a definitive solution, but as a way to redeem myself without having to lose what I had with Emiliano. And, most importantly, without having to let go of Matthias. If he accepted, it would no longer be betrayal, it would be a deal, a new stage. I could transform my guilt into freedom, my mistake into a proposal of maturity. It was selfish, yes, but in my head, distorted by need and desire, it seemed like a viable path. Emiliano was always rational and direct. If I explained it to him calmly and with convincing arguments, maybe he would understand. For weeks, I was preparing the ground. I started to introduce conversations about modern couples, magazine articles, podcasts. He listened, always in silence. Sometimes he would frown, others he would just shake his head, as if he did not want to discuss it. When I felt ready, I wrote everything I wanted to say in a notebook. I reviewed it 1,000 times and, one night, after a random dinner, I sat down with him on the sofa and I dropped the bomb. I spoke of the loss of connection between us, of the routine that was wearing us down, of the possibility of reconnecting as a couple if we could explore other external connections. I spoke beautifully, like a TED Talk speaker, and I waited for his response. It was not anger, it was not a scandal, it was nothing like I expected. Emiliano stared at me for a few seconds and said, "You are already with another guy, are you not?" My stomach churned. He did not ask with hatred, but with a coldness that cut more than screams. I denied it. I said no, that it was just an idea, an attempt to save us. He continued to look at me, then nodded slowly and said, "Okay, we will try this. Open marriage." I was speechless. A part of me wanted to celebrate, another part felt a strange chill, as if something very bad had started right there. In the following days, Emiliano seemed too calm. He did not ask any questions, he did not try to find out if I was already with someone. He just went on with his life. One day, he told me he was going out with a friend from work, another, that he was going to sleep at a colleague's house. And I realized he had not accepted it because he understood my pain. He had accepted it for something I could not yet identify. It was as if he was waiting for something, calculating, studying me. And I, blinded by the false sense of freedom, just wanted to believe that we had turned a page. But deep down, something told me that this agreement had a price and that it was going to be collected. Even with permission in hand, I continued to see Matthias in secret. It was as if the adrenaline of clandestinity was even more exciting than the anything goes. And while I thought I was controlling the game, I did not realize that Emiliano was one step ahead, watching in silence as my internal spectacle crumbled. He never mentioned it, I never collected, I never asked anything. And that faint calm began to scare me more than any fight. It was as if he had accepted the idea just to see how far I would be able to go. And I was about to discover that he would go much further than I ever imagined. For a while, I really believed I was winning. Matthias made me feel alive. Emiliano seemed at peace with the new model, and everything remained in an illusory balance, as if the house was not about to catch fire. I controlled schedules, excuses, and even started to produce more at work. I felt empowered, free, modern. It was almost ridiculous how evolved I thought I was, as if I were above the rules of traditional relationships. Looking back, I see how much of that was arrogance and also denial. I had built a fantasy where I was the protagonist and Emiliano was the patient extra. But he was not an extra and he was not patient. One Friday night, Emiliano left, saying he was going to meet an old colleague from the airbase who was passing through. It was not unusual for him to do this, so I was not alarmed. But that night he came back different, calmer than usual, silent, but with a gaze that did not look at me, but through me. I asked him how the meeting had gone and he simply replied, "Good." Then he showered and slept, without even touching me. There was something in that coldness that bothered me deeply. I, who was living another life in secret, had no right to demand anything. But still, a strange weight settled in my stomach, intuition or guilt, maybe both. 2 days later, I received a phone call. With a trembling voice and slurred words, Julieta, my best friend, crying and saying she did not know how to tell me. I insisted, astonished, until she confessed she had slept with Emiliano that Friday. She said they were drunk, that it was unintentional, that it should not have happened. I hung up without saying anything. I sat on the kitchen floor for almost an hour, staring into space. I had opened the marriage, I had cheated first, I had provoked this. But none of that diminished the burning pain I felt when I imagined him with her, the only person I trusted outside of my marriage. It was as if I had been cheated on twice at once. That night, I confronted Emiliano. I asked him, looking him in the eyes, if it was true. He did not lie, he did not even hesitate. He simply said, "It was good. Much better than I expected." Those words cut me like a razor. It was not just the confirmation of the act, it was the surgical coldness with which he described it, as if he wanted to pay me back with interest for everything I had done. He added, "You wanted this. I am just following the rules you created." I could not answer. I locked myself in the bathroom and cried until my throat hurt. And it was there, on the cold floor, that I realized how unprepared I was to live what I had proposed. I spent the next few days pretending to be normal, but inside, I was a wreck. Matthias kept sending me messages, wanting to see me, as if nothing had changed. But now every touch of his seemed wrong, as if he were forcing me to cling to something that had already lost its meaning. Meanwhile, Emiliano became more distant, more silent. He did not touch me anymore. I slept on my back. His indifference was worse than any fight, and I hated myself for having started it all. I thought I could separate desire from feeling, but the truth is that I opened a door that I did not know how to close, and Emiliano had walked through it with pleasure. It was during this period that I began to feel the ground disappearing from under my feet. I no longer controlled anything. The situation had turned against me, and I was nothing more than a spectator of a tragedy that I myself had written. Emiliano said nothing, but his silence screamed. His gaze was critical. He knew everything. It is not just about Matthias, but about me, about how weak, needy, and inconsequential I was. And yet, he did not explode. He observed. I wrote it down. He was waiting. And that behavior chilled me to the bone because, unlike me, Emiliano never reacted immediately. He was the type to attack when the victim already thought she was safe. And I still had no idea what was coming after the blow I took with Emiliano and Julieta. The most logical thing would have been to cut everything off with Matthias, but I did the opposite. I dove even deeper into that affair. It was as if the more what Emiliano had done hurt me, the more I needed Matthias to distract me, to validate me, to anesthetize me. Our affair stopped being sporadic and became constant. Lunches turned into whole afternoons, afternoons turned into nights. Some days, I did not even come home, saying I was in out-of-town meetings. Matthias never charged me, he just wanted to have me close. And I confused that with care, with love, with anything but what it really was, escape. While I thought I was controlling the game, Emiliano was moving pieces on the board that I did not even know existed. I started to notice little things. My cell phone is draining faster than normal. A call history that mysteriously disappeared. A mutual friend who, out of nowhere, started treating me strangely. And Emiliano, silent as always, but now with the air of someone who already knew the end of the story. I thought he was indifferent, when in reality he was gathering evidence, collecting details, analyzing my every move like someone planning a surgical settling of scores. And I, blind, danced in the minefield. Arguments began to arise. Not fights, but passive-aggressive taunts. I would tell him I was going out with friends, and he would say, "Have fun, at least one of us is." Once, he asked me with a sarcastic smile, "Does Matthias love you more than Carolina loved him, right?" I almost choked. I asked him where he got that from. He just laughed, turned his back and said, "Just a guess." Emiliano did not shout. He manipulated. He played with my fear, with my guilt, with my insecurity. It was like being in an invisible interrogation. Every day, I felt more pressured and less able to hide what still remained a secret. Then, the moment came when he looked me in the eye and said, "You're with Matthias, right?" I hesitated. I shook my head. I lied. I said no, that we were just friends, that he was exaggerating. He did not argue. He simply got up from the table and went to sleep. But I saw it. I saw the look in the eyes of someone who had just confirmed everything he already knew. And it was in that look that I understood that the situation had gotten completely out of my control. Until then, I still believed that I could avoid it all, that I could find a way to keep both worlds alive. But Emiliano had other plans. And, worst of all, he was willing to execute them with the coldness he always used to repair broken airplanes. In the following days, I started receiving anonymous messages, screenshots of conversations between Matthias and me, photos of his car parked in front of my house, screenshots of audios I had sent and that I swore I had deleted. It was as if someone was building a case against me and that someone could be none other than Emiliano. I started to panic inside. On one hand, Matthias said that we should run away, start over somewhere else, live our love far from everything. On the other hand, Emiliano simply watched, as if he were the author of a script in which I was already set up to fall. I felt that something big was approaching, a wave about to swallow me whole. It was then that I realized that, although I had started the game, It was now Emiliano who controlled the rules. He was no longer the passive, silent, and emotionally absent husband. He was the executor, the judge, the executioner. And I, the traitor who thought she would get away with it. The ground began to disappear from under my feet. I could no longer sleep or eat properly. Matthias wanted more from me, but everything about him now seemed fragile, small, out of place. And Emiliano was about to show his version of justice. And when he decided to act, I would have nowhere to hide. I have no one to blame but myself. That night, Emiliano called me to talk. He said it was important. His voice was calm, with no trace of anger, and that made me even more suspicious. I sat on the sofa while he placed his cell phone on a tripod and adjusted the lighting in the room. I asked him what he was doing, and he simply replied, "You will find out." Before I could insist, he went live on Instagram. Not a story, live. In a matter of minutes, there were more than 1,000 people watching. I was frozen. I tried to interrupt him, but he stopped me with a sharp gesture of his hand. My heart was beating like a drum inside my chest. I knew that all hell would break loose there. Good evening, everyone. I present to you Pilar, my wife. The woman with whom I have shared my life for 6 years. Or at least I used to share it, he began. The voice was firm and the breathing controlled. Emiliano turned his phone towards me for a few seconds and the chat exploded. People were asking what was happening and sending surprise emojis. And then he began to show evidence. Screenshots of my conversations with Matthias, slides of messages with little hearts, meeting appointments, intimate compliments, audios of me saying that Emiliano was too lukewarm to make me happy. I wanted to disappear, but there was no way out. Then he opened a folder called Pilar MP4. Inside, photos of us, my nudes with Matthias, images I do not even remember taking. He did not censor, he showed everything. He calmly slid his finger across the screen, commenting on each print with a cold narrator's tone. It was as if he were describing an engine manual, methodical, lucid, cruel. This was 2 days after our wedding anniversary, he said. Here, she said she loved me and went straight to the guy's house. The audience grew. 2,000, 3,000, 5,000. It was like a lynching in a public square, and I, emotionally tied up, unable to escape. I tried to interrupt. I tried to explain myself, but every one of my attempts was drowned out by the sound of the next revelation. Emiliano looked at me and said, "You wanted an open marriage? Well, now everyone can see how open you are." The mockery in his voice was the final blow. I started to cry, desperate. My breathing was failing. I curled up on the sofa like a punished child, but the phone remained firmly pointed at me. People were commenting. Some laughed, others said I deserved it. Someone said, "Are you crying? Go cry more." It was there, at that moment, that I understood what it was to be destroyed in public. And the worst part is that it was not over yet. Pilar, you are officially alone. Our marriage is over and you have become a celebrity for the wrong reasons. Then he ended the live stream, threw his mobile on the sofa and left the house without looking back. Not a last word, not a last look, just the sound of the door slamming violently. I stayed there motionless, a huge cry. The world was spinning and I could not move. I received calls, messages, threats. The news spread like wildfire. In a matter of minutes, I went from being just another woman to becoming the most talked about, unfaithful wife of the day. Emiliano got what he wanted. He destroyed my image and made sure the world saw it. For the next few days, I could not get out of bed. I did not sleep, I did not eat. The shame was so great that I thought about running away, disappearing, changing my name. My parents called me in a panic, my clients started canceling contracts. People I did not even know were sending me hate messages. I was canceled, humiliated, and crucified in real time. And no matter how much he crossed the line, I knew that I was the one who lit the fuse. Emiliano did not scream, he did not break anything. He simply let the world see who I really was, or at least who I had become. And the fall was so high that I am still trying to understand how I survived. In the days following the live stream, my life became a silent battlefield. I lost 3 important contracts in less than a week. A longtime client said she could not keep her name associated with the scandal. Another blocked me without giving any explanation. The rumor spread through the architecture and design groups in the city, and my name became a joke in the voice messages shared among colleagues. My mother called me crying and told me that some neighbors approached her in the market. My father hung up on me. My sister sent me a short message, "Congratulations, you have outdone yourself." And I just cried. Walking down the street became an exercise in paranoia. Every look seemed like a judgment, every distant laugh a mockery. I locked myself in the house. I started to ignore my cell phone. He did not answer the doorbell. My social media was silent, but screenshots of the live stream were circulating in groups, forums, and even on WhatsApp with strangers. People were insulting me in the comments of old posts. I received a message from a strange number that said, "You deserved worse." I was very afraid to go out. I, who once thought I was so modern, so above the judgment of others, now lived in fear of even existing. Matthias, as expected, disappeared. At first, he tried to call me to tell me that he supported me, that all of this was not fair, but soon after he disappeared. When I sent him a message, he replied coldly, "We better take a break. This is too big." And that was it. The man who said he wanted to run away with me abandoned ship at the first sign of a storm. I was alone, completely, without friends, without family, without a lover, without a husband, lying at the bottom of the well that I myself dug with my nails. The loneliness, once sought as a form of freedom, now crushed me with the weight of 1,000 judgments. I entered a state that, honestly, I do not even know if I can simply call sadness. It was more than that, it was depression. I woke up not knowing what day it was. I spent hours staring at the ceiling without thinking about anything. I lived on coffee and old cookies. I lost weight, my face lost its glow, my hair fell out in clumps. But nothing hurt as much as Emiliano's absence. Even after everything, I still wanted to talk to him, to explain it to him, to say I am sorry, that he was right about everything. But he never answered. No connection, no message, just silence. And that silence, coming from someone who once loved me, destroyed me more than any online insult. I began to reflect on everything. I tried to understand at what point I got lost. And the truth is that it was long before Matthias. It was when I started to feel invisible and, instead of facing it honestly, I went to look for the shine in other eyes. I was a coward, arrogant, proud, and foolish, very foolish. I felt superior, thinking I could cheat and still get away with it, that I could reinvent my marriage on my terms, as if Emiliano were a spectator in my series. But he was not an extra, he was the protagonist of the pain I caused. And now I was just the defeated villain in a story that everyone watched unfold in real time. Still, I tried to talk to him. I sent a last message, a long, sincere, and vulnerable text. I asked for forgiveness, said I understood everything, that I accepted everything, but I needed him to know that, despite everything, I loved him. I waited for hours, days. No response. And in that deafening silence, I began to understand that maybe some decisions cannot be reversed. Some bridges, once burned, turned to ashes. And Emiliano had already gone up in smoke in my life. Untouchable, uncatchable. And I was simply the woman who turned her own wedding into a spectacle and lost everything. A few weeks after the live stream, when the scandal was no longer a trending topic, Matthias reappeared as if nothing had happened. He sent me a casual message, asking if I was okay, if I needed to talk. I ignored him. He insisted, said he missed me, that time had passed, and that we could try again, now calmly, without pressure. I felt dizzy just reading that. He disappeared when the storm hit and wanted to come back when the sky began to clear, selfish, cowardly, opportunistic. But even with all the anger, something in me still wanted to understand. And, against my intuition, I agreed to meet with him. Just to listen, just to summarize. We met in a discreet park. He arrived with the same smile as always, as if we were a couple on vacation. During the conversation, he tried to convince me that what we had was special, that Emiliano destroyed me out of vanity, and that he, Matthias, was the one who understood me. I remained silent, listening to everything until, unintentionally, He said something that gave me chills. Those videos, we could delete them all together later. I stopped. What videos? He became visibly nervous, tried to disguise it, to change the subject. But then I understood. He had recorded it several times without telling me. And now I was not just the traitor, I was also the woman secretly filmed. That resulted in an immediate breakup. I got up, I cursed, I threatened. I said that if any material was leaked, he would have to be held accountable. He tried to smooth things over, saying it was for us, that he would never do anything with the files. But I had seen this movie before, men with too much power over the privacy of emotionally vulnerable women. I left crying with rage, with disgust at myself for having fallen into that emotional trap. The spell that still remained was broken there, on the grass of that park. Matthias was just another coward who took advantage of my weakness, and I was an accomplice to that. A few days later, an ex-girlfriend of his appeared on social media, making a public complaint, intimate videos recorded without consent. She had screenshots, audios, and even testimonies from other women. The story exploded. Matthias has become the new villain of the internet. He lost his job, he disappeared from social media and was threatened. I watched everything in silence. Not with much pleasure, not exactly, but with a strange sense of justice. It was as if the universe had finally begun to balance the scales. His downfall did not clean up what I had done, but at least it showed that he was never the victim in our story. It was there that I began, for the first time in a long time, to look at myself with a little more truth. Not with pity, but with cruelty. I was not a woman lost in love, I was emotionally greedy. I used Matthias to fill holes that I myself dug. I used Emiliano as a scapegoat for my frustrations. And I hid behind ideas of freedom that I did not even understand. The pain forced me to stop, to see, to understand that it was not just guilt, it was a consequence. That growing up, sometimes, hurts as much as collapsing. But in the end, one thing leads to another. And maybe, just maybe, there was something to rebuild from the rubble. I started therapy, slow, difficult, full of resistance. I went back to work on small, discreet projects. I cut contact with almost everyone from the past and began to live in silence, without the arrogance of someone who thinks they understand everything. I was a broken woman, trying to understand where I went wrong. Every night, it still hurts, but now I felt like I was paying my dues alone. And maybe this loneliness was the first step towards healing. I still thought about Emiliano almost every day, but now not as someone I wanted to come back, but as the man who forced me, with pain, to look in the mirror and see who I really was. It took me months to write something like this without crying in the middle, because for a long time, the only thing I felt was shame, angry at myself, at my arrogance, at my inflated ego. Today, I can look at everything and say, bluntly, I was the villain of my own story. I cheated, I manipulated. I broke the heart of someone who just wanted to live in peace. And it was only after losing everything, name, respect, love, stability, that I began to understand the real weight of my decisions. It was not bad luck, it was not a punishment, it was just a consequence. I confused freedom with lack of responsibility. I thought I deserved everything, emotion, stability, validation, and that life was unfair for not giving me this in a cute and easy package. I used the discourse of an open marriage to justify a betrayal that was already underway. I hid behind concepts so as not to face the fact I did not know how to deal with frustration. And when I felt invisible, instead of talking, of fighting, of trying, I fled into the arms of another man. I fled into the silence of my apologies and even from myself. And worst of all, I did it thinking I was right. Losing Emiliano was like losing a mirror. He was a reflection of the most mature part of me, even with all his flaws. And no matter how emotionally distant he was, he never stopped respecting me until I trampled on everything. Sometimes, I still think about him. I wonder if you're okay. Life has been remade, if you think of me. But not with a desire for reconciliation. It is more of a silent lament for having thrown away something that maybe could still have been saved. He taught me with silence, the hardest pain, to look inside and not like what you see. But this pain woke me up, it shook me and forced me to change. Nowadays, I live more simply, without deceiving myself with grandiose narratives, without looking for intensity in every corner. I learned that maturity sometimes is accepting boredom, talking before exploding. It is about recognizing when you are wrong and stopping. I have few friends, an incredible therapist, some returning clients. I reinvented myself little by little and, most importantly, I stopped trying to justify myself. I am not a victim, not even a martyr. I am just a woman who made a huge mistake, but, by luck or by force, managed to survive her own fall. And with that, to rebuild something more honest with herself. I learned to forgive myself, not because I believe I deserve it, but because carrying eternal guilt is also ego. It is also a way of not growing. To forgive oneself is to admit that it will hurt, but that you can move forward. What you did is part of who you were, but it does not have to define who you will be. Emiliano never responded to my last message. I never saw Julieta again. And Matthias, well, he was erased from my life like a stain that time washed away. I continue, one step at a time, with visible scars, but with my eyes more open than ever. I know that I will never forget everything that happened, and I do not even want to. I carry it as a mark, as a memory, as a break. Maybe this is the closest thing to redemption that someone like me can achieve, an open ending, yes, but for the first time, with hope. I hope that one day I can be remembered not only as the woman who cheated, but as the woman who fell and, although she was hurt, decided to get up.